Okay, in today's video, we're going to talk about a personality theory. I'm sure you've heard of the Myers-Briggs one, the MBTI, but this one's a little different. This one's called the Four Temperaments, and I feel like people who are into like psychology and stuff have like their favorite personality theory. And I know YouTube is like pretty big on MBTI, but I'm really into the Four Temperaments. It's the bomb, and we're going to talk about it today, and I'll help you figure out kind of maybe which one you are. So stay tuned. Welcome to Thomistic Womanhood. In today's video, we're going to talk about my favorite personality theory, and it's the Four Temperaments. This does not get talked about a lot on YouTube. I actually tried to search for it, and there was like not that many videos about it, and I think that's a crying shame because it's awesome. And it's actually one of the oldest personality theories. If you've heard of like MBTI, it's, you know, the Myers-Briggs thing, it's like that. But I don't know, it's got like an interesting twist. And I feel like it was the original classification of people. Different psychologists through the ages have kind of put their own name on it, which I feel like actually only further lends like weight to it, you know, kind of like gives it more proof. But basically, so what it is it was originally started by Hippocrates. Yeah, the guy that's known as like the father of medicine and the Hippocratic Oath. This guy actually is the one that classified it was originally known as like the four humors. Humors meaning it was like a really old-timey word for like liquids of the body. And Hippocrates kind of noticed that like certain people would have a predominance of a certain like bodily fluid, and Hippocrates lived about, okay, so he died about 10 years before Aristotle was born. So this is how old he is. And Aristotle, a lot of the Greek philosophers, you know, they were aware of his findings, but it was really in, and forgive me if I'm butchering the name, Avicenna, I think it was. He was in, I believe, AD 980, and he was one of the early medical researchers of that time, you know, the Roman Empire. And he is the first one to really apply this four temperament idea to emotions and like human behavior. Hippocrates tended to see it as merely a physical thing, and that it was like, you know, the cause of medical problems. You know, like if you had too much blood, then that was one problem. But Avicenna was the one that really kind of noticed that there was generally four kinds of personalities, you know, that mapped up really well with this four humors idea that Hippocrates had originally done. But he was the one that was like, I don't think it's necessarily caused by the liquids. He's like, these just seem to be four personality types. Having said that, you know, that again, that was in like 980 AD. That was a long time ago. But the general idea has stuck around for hundreds of years. And when I describe these four temperaments for you, trust me, you'll hear it and you'll be like, I know someone like that. I know someone like that. I know someone like that. And I feel like that's the beauty of the system. And to me, I feel like that's what also makes it true, because it is so, I feel like, universal. And this is often attributed to Carl Jung, which is not true. This has been around like literally for millennium. And I think it's like every decade or two, somebody gives these names like new modern names and then just describes the same stuff. Even MBTI, I feel like some of the basic, you know, like NT, NF, some of that does kind of map to this. And so, you know, people give it different names, but it's the same underlying concept. But this is the original one. And this is the one that a lot of Thomistic psychology books will talk about. A lot of Catholic theology talks about this. And so it's a very interesting, again, it's a tool for self-knowledge, figuring out who you are. And I'm pulling mainly from a book here. This is a really good book if you want to know more about it. Again, there's not a lot of stuff on YouTube about this, but this is a really good book on it. This is the one I studied in college. It's by Reverend Conrad Hawk, and it's going to tell you, a little bit about, well, actually a lot. There's a lot of information packed in this book, but it'll tell you about it. And there's also a quiz in the back here where you can figure out what temperament is yours. So I'll put a link to this in the channel. Disclaimer, it may be an affiliate link, so I might get a kickback. And if that weirds you out, just search it on Amazon and you'll get it without the link. But either way, I'll link to that in the description and then you can take a look at it. There are online tests, but I've found that the online tests often are not very good. I feel like really just taking this quiz in the back of it, as you can see, there's a whole questionnaire and it's very thorough, so it'll help you figure that out. But anyways, without further ado, we're going to talk about what it actually is. So there are 4 temperaments. We have the sanguine, the choleric, the melancholic, and the phlegmatic. And so the names again came from original body fluids. Sanguine was for blood, sanguinus, that is the Latin word for blood. Choleric I think it was black bile, and then I think melancholic was the yellow bile. I forget the other one, and then phlegmatic, phlegm. But, we know that this is not really what's causing it, but the names just kind of stuck for these general ideas. And the way they were grouped, it was kind of a preponderance of a certain fluid and whether it was a wet-dry combination or things like that. But yeah, so basically with the first one, the sanguine, we're going to talk about this first because it's kind of the funnest one to talk about. So the sanguine is the life of the party person. They're extroverted. The sanguine and the choleric are the extroverted ones, and the melancholic and the phlegmatic are the introverted ones. The sanguine and the choleric are the active ones, and the melancholic and the phlegmatic are a little more laid back. But the sanguine is the life of the party person. They're very cheerful, they're a little superficial, they always want to be socializing, they always want to be flitting from detail to detail. They're very enthusiastic, when they see something, they have an immediate reaction. If you have a friend, maybe you hang out with her a lot and she's always very enthusiastic and she gets excited and she wants to tell you about it and she has this big smile, or she's very emotional and oh my gosh, my boyfriend didn't call me back, and she's crying. Sanguines are emotionally, I feel almost exhausted doing the whole thing, but as you can see, they're very emotionally volatile. There's a lot of feelings going on with the sanguine. And sanguines are often, they being the center of attention. There's a lot of sanguine girls on Instagram and YouTube. They're the ones that like to be in front of the camera. They like the attention. Sanguine men, they like to be actors and comedians. They like to be the funny guy, And so, yeah, they want to be the life of the party, And they add a lot of joy and happiness. The light side of the sanguine is they're very cheerful and optimistic. And, it's said if you have to give someone bad news, send a sanguine to do it, because they will be able to tell them, they could tell you your mom died and they would have a way of softening that. They're really good at delivering bad news because they can tell you well, at least you get the dog now, and it's just kind of okay, but you kind of laugh at and with sanguines, there is a bit of a childlikeness. Sometimes sanguines can be very outspoken. They do not have a filter. And yeah, sometimes their mouth gets them into trouble. But yeah, on the bright side, they're just generally really cheerful, optimistic people. And they do bring a lot of joy and happiness into our lives. They're really good at radiating happiness and cheering everyone around them, On the dark side, sanguines are a little superficial. They don't want to go too deep into details. You know, if something bad happens, you know, they don't really want to dwell on why it went wrong or whatever. They're like, let's just get back to being happy. You know, they don't really want to get too into the details for things like that. So they can be a little superficial, and that can be bad. You know, they often have a reluctance towards self-knowledge. You know, there are certain temperaments that, you know, they really like the introspection. You know, the melancholic is like that. They like to reflect on themselves and things like that. But the sanguine, they don't want to reflect. They don't want to go to therapy. They don't want to dig into their issues. No, it's over. It's in the past. I want to get on with being happy. That's how sanguines are. And, you know, that can be bad. The other thing about sanguines is they can be a little vain. They're very into how they look, and do they have nice clothes, and do they have nice mannerisms, and do I look good? You know, I definitely think there is a strong sanguine element in the Kardashian women. You know, there's that superficiality. I feel like Kourtney's maybe a little more melancholic, you know, but I feel like Kim and Kylie might be a little more sanguine. You know, they definitely like being in the spotlight. They really like their looks. But yeah, you know, that's the sanguine temperament. And so, yeah, there can be some vanity there. They can get very caught up in just how things look, external appearances. Sanguines often have relationship problems because they will get drawn in by how charming a guy is. You know, if he dresses really nice and he says nice things and he's really cute, like, oh, you know, sanguines are in. But they often, you know, they don't really look very deep, and then they get into these relationships and they're like, oh, you know, they come to you crying, and it's like, well, you know, did you notice? Yeah, I was mean to the waiter, but like, who cares? What does that really mean? You know, like, and so they don't often see the signs of impending problems. So that can be an issue. So that is the sanguine temperament. One thing about sanguines that is interesting on relationships, because of their generally loving nature, they're very extroverted, they love people. They can tend to flatter a little bit. You know, they're the ones that they're more sanguine. Men are really good. They are smooth talkers. You know, the guy that's a little narcissist, your classic narcissist that will love bomb can often be a sanguine, because they are just so good at telling you what you want to hear, because they're extroverted and they're into people and they want to make you happy, but they're shallow. You know, they don't stick around. After that initial high wears off, they're like a little butterfly and they flit off to the next thing. So sanguine men can do a lot of damage, but it is said that a sanguine, no one will love you more nor forget you as fast. So that's kind of the light and the dark side about sanguines and relationships. So that's the sanguine temperament. The next one is the choleric. So the choleric is the controlling and the planner and the initiative, and they want to dominate. You know, it's often said that like Napoleon was a choleric. Guys like that, you know, a lot of the dictator and the guys, you know, CEOs, there's a lot of cholerics in the boardrooms. You know, they're the ones that they want to plan and they have a vision and everybody needs to get on board with my vision. Choleric women can be the women like the mother, you know, like the matriarch of the family, and she's planning out every detail of your wedding and you'd better go along with it or there's going to be drama, you know. She can be very controlling. Choleric men can be very controlling, and they're very cold about it. You know, cholerics are, you know, sanguines are emotionally very warm. There's a lot of like feeling going on. Cholerics are very cold. They're very calculated. They don't really get too much into emotion. They will get angry. A choleric often has a bad temper. They don't show a lot of feeling except often when it comes to anger. They can be very vindictive. You know, a choleric is very... If you humiliate a choleric, you know, he's that guy at your workplace where, you know, if you're just bringing up things in a meeting and it's maybe his idea that he's trying to push forward and you just innocently point out the flaw in his plan, he's the guy that's going to remember it for the next like 6 weeks and just be like really butthurt about it and like, you know, oh, she's calling me out. Oh, you know, that they're very egotistical, you know, whereas the sanguine is vain, but their vanity is kind of superficial. With the choleric, their vanity is deeper. They don't want it to necessarily be thought of as like good looking or, you know, people like me on a superficial level. They want to be seen as the best. I am the smartest. I am the one that made this all happen. and you need to agree with my idea and blah, blah, blah. And cholerics are often very intelligent. They will often have, I guess maybe a high IQ is a good way of saying it, but they're often really smart and they can be very calculated. The choleric temperament is often, they're a little psychopathic. They don't really care about how they affect other people. Now, the bright side of the choleric is they have a lot of drive. They get a lot of things done. Women that somehow manage to pull off, career and motherhood, and they're shooting up the ladder, and they're like, the next CEO of whatever, and somehow they manage to have a husband and 3 beautiful children, and they're just juggling it all, and you're just like, this woman's superhuman. That's usually a choleric for you. They're very driven, very ambitious. And so on the bright side, they are intelligent, they are good planners, and they can get stuff done. They don't waver, they don't, a sanguine, that's the person who's like, look at this great workout plan. I'm on his 30-day challenge. And then you ask them about day 5, and they're like, oh yeah, I stopped. I forgot about that. Choleric doesn't do that. If a choleric commits to something, they will stick it out. That is a good thing about the choleric temperament. They tend to stick to their goals, and then they get a lot accomplished. And so, they can accomplish a lot for society and for their family and for their life, because they are driven, they like to plan, and they stick to those plans, and they will get things done. They're not very emotional. They will just get stuff done, So that's kind of the bright side. They're also really smart. So if you need somebody to argue like the truths of the faith, if you need them to argue, if you want to get an idea pushed through your workplace or something, get a choleric in your corner, because they will be, they're not as tuned into people's feelings. And so they will just plow right ahead and make a case and describe things and get people on board. And they don't really kind of be timid and hem and haw because they don't want to hurt. They'll just come tell you straight out how it is, and they don't care. And that can be useful. Lawyers are often choleric because they're very smart. They can prove their argument really well, and they're not afraid to argue. They're not afraid to be obnoxious to get their point across. So that can be a strength of the choleric. But the dark side of the choleric is that, again, they're not very tuned into people's feelings. If you have a mother who's very controlling, and yet she'll say things to you that are like really mean, like, you come home and you're like, yeah, I got this great new boy, or let's say your fiance like asked you to marry him, and you're like excited, and you come home and tell your mom, and she's like, yeah, but his job sucks. And you're just like, Mom, thanks, or like they just say cutting things, and they're like, what? It's true. Like, that's a choleric thing. Cholerics are they will go right to the heart of a matter. The sanguine kind of floats on the surface. The choleric will go right to the essentials, and that's why they make great speakers, and they can often inspire people and get a lot of, people on board with an idea, because they don't waste time with chit chat. They get right to the point, and then people are like, oh, and they make a case. They're very logical, and they can explain their point, and then people are like, great, yeah, I'm going to do that. But like I said, they can be very cold, they can be domineering. They're my way or the highway. They're very egotistical. They don't want to listen to other people. They don't want to take direction. If you are a manager, managing a choleric is going to be hard, because they don't want to take orders from anyone. According to a choleric, I am my own guide. Nobody can tell them what to do. So if you are managing a choleric, or let's say you have a choleric child, you're a parent, you want to really explain to that kid why you're telling them what you are telling them to do, or that manager, you have to explain. Don't be too weak, because cholerics tend to kind of scorn weakness in people. They're a little snobby, they are very gifted, intellectually and as far as like perseverance goes. And sometimes those gifts make them a little uppity. And so when they see other people struggling, they go, well, I'm better, The melancholic or the sanguine will feel sorry for that person, but the choleric, they're going to be, oh, well, they deserved it, or they're not as good as me, or whatever, So that can be the dark side of the choleric. Now, choleric men in relationships, they're tough. Choleric men in relationships can be, they're the guy who, if your butt looks big, they will tell you. And then when you get mad, they're like, I don't know why you're mad. I just told the truth and you asked me anyways. You know, they're definitely thinkers more than feelers. You know, the thing about a choleric man is, see, sanguines are kind of like love at first sight, and then they just like forget. You know, they're just like love at first sight with like 16 women. The choleric guy, he may be love at first sight, and he tends to kind of commit. He tends to be, if he's into you, he's gonna kind of stay into you, you know? He's not as flighty as a sanguine man. A choleric man, you know, they'll date you for a while. They'll take some time to figure out, you know, if you're worth their time and if you're the woman they want. You know, they're very goal-oriented. So if they've decided whatever their goals are for the relationship, they're going to take a little time to discern and figure you out and see if you're going to fit into those goals. But if they've determined that you have, then they will stick with you. They've determined they want to get married and they're looking for a wife, and they've, you know, you fit the bill, they'll stick with you. You know, they'll commit. And so that is something about cholerics. However, if you are a very sensitive emotional temperament, if you're like a sanguine or a melancholic, you're going to have a hard time with the choleric man because they're not very emotional. They don't open up about their feelings. You know, choleric men are not into that. A sanguine man, he does have feelings. You know, if he sees a sad movie, he's going to tear up a little bit. He will cry. A sanguine man out of all the temperaments is most likely to be crying at a sad movie. A choleric man is probably the least likely to be crying. I mean, they only cry if somebody dies. You know, if their mom died, yeah, you might see them shed a tear. But they're not like emotional. And so if you're the kind of woman that wants a little bit, you know, a man with a sensitive side, you're not going to get that with a choleric man. So watch out. If you like planners and doers and, you know, you don't want to mess around with all that like ooey gooey feeling stuff, get with a choleric guy. You'll be really happy. But again, if you're a sensitive temperament, a choleric will be too abrasive for you, and it'll be difficult to be in a relationship with them. So that's that on cholerics. And then the next one is the melancholic. So the melancholic this is the person, whereas the sanguine is very into positivity and cheerfulness, the melancholic is the opposite. They're the pessimist. You've seen Winnie the Pooh, Eeyore is a melancholic. You know, he's kind of an exaggeration of a melancholic, but he's a melancholic. He's going to sit there and be like, oh, it's a terrible day today. Look, I forgot my lunch. Oh, great. I got passed over for this promotion. You know, like melancholics look on the dark side. They tend to approach life from a very serious angle. Now, melancholics, like the choleric, they're very intelligent. And so part of the reason they're so negative is because they are like working overtime to like analyze the world. Melancholics are very analytical. I think it was, forget which philosopher said this, but one of the more ancient philosophers, he said that the melancholic is the best. Let me see if the quote's in here. I really want to remember who it was that said this, but they basically said, bear with me a second while I see if I can find that. I don't think it's in this book, actually. I might have a different. Yeah, I don't think it's in here. Basically, one of the philosophers, I want to say Aristotle, but I don't think it was him. They said that the melancholic is the best temperament for a philosopher because they are so deep. The melancholic is very analytical. They are the overthinkers of the temperaments. They will take a subject and they will think it to death. And because of that, though, they are very, very smart. You know, they are often like inventors. You know, they're not always into like philosophical stuff. They can be like the inventors and the thinkers and things like that. But they will go, whereas the sanguine kind of skates on the surface of things. The choleric goes right to the essentials, but the melancholic goes all the way down to like the foundations of things. They're the opposite of the sanguine. And oftentimes the melancholic can be like driven crazy by the sanguine because the sanguine is like, yay, la la la. But the melancholic wants to go deeper. The melancholic wants to know the ultimate causes of things. You know, you can't give them a surface level answer. They want to know why, you know? And so that is the melancholic temperament. They're just big thinkers, but they tend to be kind of sad. They're also more introverted. You know, the sanguine and the cholerics, they're the extroverts of the temperaments. The melancholic is an introvert. They don't like being around people. Part of it is because they are so sensitive. The melancholic feels everything really deeply. They're very sensitive. They can be touchy. If they're a melancholic that was, maybe given a little too much alone time and they weren't really taught to kind of balance their gloominess, they can be very negative, and they can kind of just turn in on themselves. And I don't want to be around people, people bother me and they say things that are rude, and then it really affects them. Now, a melancholic is also very emotional. They're like the sanguine in that they can feel deep sorrow and deep joy. The melancholic is also the most naturally religious of the temperaments. There's certain people that they just kind of get the idea of there's a God, there's some kind of being, and we owe that being some kind of acknowledgement. Melancholics kind of naturally get that, so they are the people who are often, a lot of churches have a lot of melancholics in them. And so one other thing about the melancholic is they can be very emotional, but unlike the sanguine, they don't wear their heart on their sleeve. If the melancholic's having a bad day, it may be hard to tell because they're always serious, and I say that with love because I'm part melancholic too. But yeah, they're not very explosive and showy with their feelings. Melancholics are very kind of private people, and they don't really want to, they don't really wear their heart on their sleeve. Now, if you win their trust, they'll kind of open up to you and then that's that. But in general, their feelings are more interior. The sanguine is a very exterior person. They kind of show everything. The melancholic is not like that. They're more introverted. On the bright side of the melancholic, like I said, they're very intelligent. They're very loving. They're like the sanguine. Even though they don't like people, they have their favorite people. Sanguines kind of like everybody. Melancholics are, they like their group. If you're their family or you're in their inner sanctum, melancholics, they're very loyal, they're very loving, and they're very self-sacrificing. A melancholic, if that person trusts you, they will do whatever they can for you. And it's not in the showy way of the sanguine or maybe the prideful way of the choleric, look at me, I'm helping you. The melancholic kind of just quietly does it. They just want you to be happy and they kind of just, help you out. And that's that. And so they can be very self-sacrificing. They can often exhaust themselves because they don't, they get so in their head, they don't take care of themselves. But so that is the bright side of the melancholic. They're very deep and they have, brought a lot of intellectual riches and, inventions and things to humanity. A lot of the art, melancholics are amazing artists. A lot of the great plays or novels or paintings, were often made by cholerics. They can be very artistic, and the greatest pieces of art, whatever the medium, is often from melancholics. And so they definitely make major contributions to society. But on the dark side, they are very negative and they can get very wrapped up in themselves and then become very touchy. If you have a mother that is, she's just always complaining about her health and the economy and poor me, everybody needs to feel sorry for me, that can be, if she's upset over more superficial things, she may be have some sanguine mixed in there, but she's probably melancholic. Because melancholics, they're touchy, all that. So again, and then the fourth one is the phlegmatic. This person is very chill. This is just a very laid back temperament, They're not really ambitious. They don't, they're kind of introverted. They like people. They're a very stable friend and they don't get too high or too low. They just kind of coast along life, before I move on from the melancholic, dating melancholic men. This can be difficult because melancholic men are timid. They don't want to, expose themselves to rejection. So it could be hard for them to make the first move, but they are thinkers. And so if they like you, they will eventually make the first move. They are very loving and they're the man that will open up about his feelings. They are emotional and they are gentle. They're the men. It's said that a melancholic man is most likely to be kind to his wife out of all the temperaments. You know how a lot of men, it's like once they marry you, they kind of slack off. And like sometimes, you know, some women complain that, you know, once a man thinks he got you, he stops putting effort into it. Melancholic man is not like that. He's the temperament least likely to do that. And so if you can get past some of the gloominess, he's a very devoted, loving partner. And again, if you are into the more emotional side of life and you want a man that's kind of in touch with his feelings, he will kind of be like the silent type. You know, he's not going to talk a lot, but once he trusts you, like he will open up, and they often have a very beautiful inner world. You know, when you talk to a melancholic and you see how they view the world and the thoughts and the conclusions they've come to, it can be very inspiring. You know, these are the men that like one night after you guys go to the movies, you know, he tells you his ideas on something and it's like, wow, you know, it's this very intimate, close conversation. And you're like, wow, I had no idea this guy was so, you know, that guy's probably a melancholic, you know? So yeah, that's kind of how the melancholic man is in relationships. And then again, going back to what I was saying before, the phlegmatic, that man is, or woman, you know, the phlegmatic person is just very chill. They're just very laid back. The sanguine, all the other temperaments can have very violent feelings. The sanguine will show those feelings. The choleric will often only have feelings if like their plans are thwarted, you know, or they feel insulted, like they're not getting the proper respect. They can lash out with like really immediate anger and you're like, whoa, where did that come from? You know, and so the choleric can have very powerful feelings. And the melancholic, again, also has, you know, a lot of emotion and feeling, which is usually internal, but it can be shown a lot of crying, maybe some yelling if they're a man. But the the phlegmatic doesn't have these big emotional displays like other temperaments. This is the person where you're like, don't you ever get mad? You know, or like, didn't that hurt you? And the person's like, no, not really. I mean, why would I get mad? You know, and you're just like flabbergasted because you're like, what's up with this person? That's likely a phlegmatic. You know, they genuinely don't get too riled up about stuff. And they're loyal friends, you know, like I said, they're stable people. They're not into a lot of drama. You know, other temperaments can often start drama. Phlegmatics, not so much. You know, they're kind of just there. They're up for a good time. You know, hey, you want to like go for a ride and we'll go to Dairy Queen? Okay, cool. Yeah, you know, and they're just, yeah, they, you know, and they kind of like in the workplace, they're kind of just the person that just gets stuff done. You know, they don't talk a lot in the meetings. They don't get too riled up. They don't get into like politics. They kind of just show up, do their work and go home, you know, and the contribution to society that the phlegmatic makes. And a lot of books, especially this one, there's not a lot of discussion about the phlegmatic temperament. People will talk very much about the other temperaments, and I feel like phlegmatics kind of get overlooked a little bit. But they are people like the sanguine. They often have a very positive attitude. You know, the melancholic can be gloomy just because they're overthinking everything and they analyze everything, and it hurts them. You know, the melancholics are often major perfectionists, and they see how humanity is falling short of the goal, you know, and that stresses melancholics out. So they're often sad. And then, you know, cholerics, they can often be like brooding that their plans didn't work, you know, and then the sanguines, like, people didn't pay attention to me, you know, but the phlegmatic, they don't have those hangups. They don't care, you know, they're just like, oh yeah, life is great. You know, surfer dudes, you know, the stereotype of the surfer dude is like, yeah, whatever, dude, like, let's just go surfing, let's catch some waves and like be happy, you know, and that's kind of all they care about. That's the phlegmatic, you know, they don't get too riled up about things. And the bright side of the phlegmatic is, like I said, they add that stability to life. They're very stable people. They don't, you know, run off with the secretary. You know, they're not that kind of person. The dark side is they can be a little boring at times. You know, if you're a kind of person who needs like, you know, if you're a sanguine person, I think you're going to have a hard time. Like if you're a woman, dating a phlegmatic guy is going to be kind of hard if you're like sanguine. You want that like emotional stimulation. You want something going on. If you're choleric though, you'll like phlegmatics. Phlegmatics and cholerics tend to get together a lot because they're natural complements. You know, the choleric has all the drive and the ambition, and the phlegmatic kind of is like, great, I'll be your sidekick. I'll implement your plans. Cool. Let's just do it, you know? And the choleric can be a little abrasive, you know, often without even trying. And the phlegmatic is so laid back that they don't get too hurt by that abrasiveness. The sanguine and the melancholic, it can be very painful for them to maybe work for a choleric, or if their parent is a choleric or their partner, because the choleric just has a natural abrasiveness that they have to work to tone down. But while they're, you know, working, hopefully in life, the choleric is trying to kind of tone that abrasiveness down. But the other temperaments, you know, sanguines and melancholics can have a hard time, you know, because they are sensitive temperaments, and that abrasiveness can hurt them. And that's why the phlegmatic and the choleric get along well, because the phlegmatic is just, they don't get hurt that easy. They're not super sensitive people. And so, you know, choleric says something abrasive and the phlegmatic's like, yeah, that's your opinion. And they don't care, you know? And so that can be good. But on the other hand, sanguines and melancholics tend to get together a lot. The natural optimism like attracts the gloominess of the melancholic. The guy that's kind of always like sad and kind of down, you know? And then he gets with this like really bubbly girl, perky, and you're like, what the? And he's just crazy about her. That's often a sanguine melancholic pairing there, that their optimism of the sanguine balances out the gloominess of the melancholic. And vice versa. The sanguine is very shallow, and they're not detail oriented. You know, if you're sanguine, you'll often have a very messy house. I'm part sanguine, so I have a messy house. I'm not judging anybody. But if you're sanguine, you'll be attracted to the melancholic. This is why Marilyn Monroe was attracted with Arthur Miller. You know, you can see she was very sanguine and melancholic, or sanguine and kind of flighty. And then Arthur Miller was like this deep, creative guy, you know? And that's kind of why that pairing happened, and kind of, I don't want to say it worked, because she actually kind of broke up his marriage and they got together and that wasn't good. But, you know, that's a really famous example of a sanguine and a melancholic getting together. Now, I think she had some melancholic in her temperament as well. But, you know, sanguines love melancholics because melancholics have that depth that the sanguine craves. A sanguine is, like I said, they're kind of shallow, they're kind of superficial, whereas the melancholic is the opposite. They go deep into the details, and that can balance the sanguine. You know, the sanguine can love that about the melancholic. You know, they can, you know, if you're a sanguine woman and you meet a melancholic guy, you will be enthralled with him, because he'll just sit there and like tell you his ideas about the universe. And like to you, like you've never heard anything that deep in your life, and you're just like, this is amazing. You are the most brilliant man ever. And then, you know, the melancholic's all happy because he feels appreciated, you know? And so that can be a natural pairing there too. And so sanguines and melancholics do often get together. And, you know, we often see this in marriages, you know? One person will be very disorganized and cheerful, and the other one's a little more serious and perfectionist and like, honey, you left the toothpaste cap off, oh, you know. And so that can happen. Also, in people themselves, the question may come up, what temperament am I? If you're listening to this and you're like, well, I have aspects of the choleric, but, you know, I like attention, so maybe I'm sanguine. We often have primarily one temperament, which then is mixed in with like a secondary temperament. You rarely find somebody that's just 100% one temperament. We're all kind of blends of them. And ideally, you know, to be a balanced person, you want to kind of be a blend of all of them. But your temperament is I feel like your temperament is more or less fixed. That seems to be the general opinion through the centuries about temperament. It's kind of just the way you are, and you need to work on overcoming the defects and the faults of your temperament. Like if you're sanguine, you need to work on remembering, you know, keeping things tidy and try not to be so superficial, you know. You have to work on that thing. If you're melancholic, you have to work on trying not to be so gloomy, like try not to look at the dark side all the time. You know, try to have some trust in your fellow man. Melancholics have a hard time with trust. that temperament has big trust issues. It's hard for melancholics to trust people because, again, they're very perfectionistic and analytical. And so that's something a melancholic has to strive against. If you're choleric, you need to like learn some humility. And again, you're probably not going to like me saying that because you're going to be like, well, who are you? Why should I listen to you? But that's something the choleric needs to develop. They have to try and be more compassionate to their fellow man, and they have to be humble. They have to learn to take orders from people, especially people that maybe they don't respect. And then with the phlegmatic, the problem with the phlegmatic is they need to develop some ambition. A phlegmatic man, if you date one, that's the guy that, you know, he's romantic and, you know, he's fun to be around, but he doesn't have any ambition, you know. He works at Kmart and he honestly doesn't see the problem with that. These are the men that, you know, they don't want to go up the career ladder. You know, they've got their job and they're happy where they're at, you know, and they don't want to get a promotion. They don't want to move ahead in their career. They're like, well, I'm paying my bills, you know. Or maybe they're that musician guy that, like, you know, his music clearly isn't taking off, but he doesn't want to stop doing it because, oh, I have freedom this way. Why would I go into the corporate world? That's hard. That's effort. I'm fine how I am, you know, and never mind the fact he's living in like a 1-bedroom studio and can't afford a car, you know, and he doesn't really get too bothered by it, you know. If you're with a phlegmatic guy, you got to accept that lack of ambition is just how he is. And if you want a man that, you know, has a little more drive, you're going to need a new boyfriend. I hate to say that because cholerics, they're not an ambitious temperament. It's just not how they are. And that's with the phlegmatic, that is something they have to work on. They definitely have a wonderful ability to, you know, stick to their goals. You know, once they decide what they want to do, you know, if they can muster up some ambition and make a commitment to some kind of a goal, you know, they're very much the slow and steady wins the race kind of person. But their difficulty is coming up with that goal to begin with. You know, it's hard for them to muster up the motivation to do things. You know, if you find yourself struggling with like procrastination and you have a hard time getting things done, you may be phlegmatic. You know, don't be too hard on yourself and be like, oh my gosh, what's wrong with me? You know, like my friend, you know, maybe your friends, phlegmatics and cholerics tend to come together. You know, they tend to find each other as like friends and stuff. And so, you know, maybe you have a lot of choleric friends and you're always like comparing yourself to like how driven they are and like how productive and how much stuff they get on. You know, they're like on Instagram posting like 5 a.m. did my run, and you're over here like it's 9 a.m. and you're in bed with potato chips, you know. You may be phlegmatic, you know, being really driven and ambitious and like getting a ton of stuff done. That's not your jam. But you do need to get some things done. And so if you're phlegmatic, you want to kind of work it, you want to kind of develop, you know, some goals for yourself, and you want to try and, you know, put in the effort to achieve those goals. It may be hard to muster it up at first, but try to think through, you know, use your mind to come up with reasons for what you really want. And, you know, and then you can kind of, it'll help you pick goals that you'll feel motivated to do that will, you know, be something worth like getting out of bed for, you know, or getting dressed in the morning for, you know. So that's that. Another random tidbit about the melancholic, that kind of person is really into like therapy. That's the person that wants to like journal about their like traumas and stuff. That's a melancholic trait. But yeah, so that's the 4 temperaments. It's kind of the light and the dark side, and then also like kind of some relationship advice if you run into these men or you're trying to, you know, make a relationship work with them. That's kind of the stuff you'll run into. So I hope that was helpful for you. If you like this video, you know the drill, like, share, subscribe, all that stuff. But yeah, that's the 4 temperaments. And I will include a link to this book with the questionnaire. And yeah, I hope that was helpful for you.